The California Institute of Integral Studies welcomes you to Ayahuasca, Amazonian Shamanism, Science, and Spirituality. This opening panel is entitled, What is Ayahuasca and Why is it Significant? Introduced to you.
So I'd like to add my welcome then to you for this conference, which is going to explore ayahuasca from many points of view, but in particular one could say three main points of view. The point of view of ayahuasca as an essential aspect of traditional shamanic healing and divination practices in South America. And that practice in South America, followed with ayahuasca by many peoples in Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, is in itself part of a larger system of worldwide practices by indigenous people using indigenous healing methods, which we'll hear a lot about during this conference. So that's one aspect and one perspective, and it's the oldest. And then there's the perspective of modern science, the scientific approach of the biologists, the botanists, the ethnographers, the ecologists, the chemists, the pharmacologists, the psychologists and psychologists, the social science and medical science, biological science approach to knowledge, which can be integrated with the traditional approach, although they're often separate. And it'll be one of the contributions that I think will emerge out of the work done by many of the people here presenting here this weekend, that there are interesting and unsuspected points of convergence between traditional shamanistic approaches and viewpoints and the viewpoints emerging out of modern scientific research. And a third broad perspective, of course there are many always, but a third broad perspective shared by many is, one could call it a socio-cultural phenomenon of a spiritual movement, not so much necessarily tied into either shamanism or science, but in itself, both syncretic and highly original forms of religious practice, what some anthropologists might call a religious revitalization movement, taking place that involves cultural phenomena, cultural transformations, whose outlines we are just beginning to discern and really can't be foretold with any great certainty, but are very promising because the individual experiences that they're based on with near unanimity report experiences with these substances in these various contexts to be both healing, both spiritual, and knowledge-inducing. So I don't think it's too much of a stretch to imagine that an infusion of those kinds of energies can only be positive for the culture and the society. I'm not going to say any more general things now. I have a couple of things to say that could be considered kind of housekeeping things or structural remarks. I want to say that actually, contrary to some of the statements I made in the first mailings of this is not the first international conference on ayahuasca. There have been previous international conferences on ayahuasca. They have been in South America, and I neglected to mention that. One of them was organized by our friend Eduardo Luna, who's going to be speaking here this weekend, and there have been others organized by one of the churches, the União de Vegetal. So I just want to acknowledge that it is the first conference in North America, as far as I know, and it is international. So, but I did want to acknowledge that we have predecessors. I also want to say something about there's a certain peculiarity about this gathering, and I think you all understand what it is. And I'm going to say this, try to say this very carefully, so I would like you to attend very carefully to what I'm going to say. These substances that we're talking about are in an area of legal, social limbo that is actually verges towards a framework of prohibition. So whether or not ayahuasca as a concoction is technically illegal or not is a legal question that has not actually been decided by courts. However, it is an area in which legal situations and sanctions have been mounted against some individuals. I want to make it perfectly clear that in having this conference, we, myself, any of the presenters, or the staff, or the Institute, or Tony, are not advocating the breaking of any law or the taking of any substance that is against the law. And I have asked the staff and the presenters not to answer questions that relate to how these substances might be obtained and where one could go to obtain them or who one could go to obtain them. And I would ask you, the audience, to do us a favor and not to ask those kinds of questions. So, having said that, I have an additional remark to make. That's okay, thank you. By way of housekeeping, one is that we ask you not to tape these. Okay, and the way what we're going to do now in the, I'm going to ask the presenters, the main presenters, to come up and introduce their work, their perspective, their approach to ayahuasca. I gave them the question something like this: what is ayahuasca and why is it significant? Or why is it significant? I don't think we need to go into what is it over and over, because by this time everybody knows what it is and has some idea what it is. But what is your approach? What is your perspective? What is the approach and perspective that you are going to be taking in your talk and your presentation? And because we have 16 people, I'm going to ask the presenters in two groups or series of 8 to come up and take a seat up here, and then I'm going to ask them to each speak for 5 minutes, and I'm going to time them, and I'm going to ring a bell when the 5 minutes is up. So we are going to make it through this time. They all know this. This is not a surprise. So, and then after we have done that, we will end by showing a film of a traditional ayahuasca, a short film, about 20 minutes, of a traditional ayahuasquero going through his, and by doing through his preparations and talking about his life. And that will be by way of honoring and acknowledging the tradition which goes back into unrecorded past, who knows how many generations of anonymous men and women in the Amazon region of South America who have practiced and pursued the healing knowledge invoked by these remarkable plants. So if now Eduardo Luna and Jose Campos and Kathleen Harrison and Jeremy Narby and Connie Grouds, Charles Grobe, Jace Calloway, and Dennis McKenna would come up and sit here in that order. You're going to hear from them in the order in which you will hear from them tomorrow. So, our first speaker is going to be Luis Eduardo Luna. He's a Colombian-born anthropologist who has lived for many years also in Finland, and who was published one of the first and detailed ethnographies of ayahuasca called Vegetalismo, and has also published a wonderful book of art by Pablo Amoringo, with commentaries, and has also published a very recent anthology today that's hot off the press, the Ayahuasca Reader. So,
Yeah. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. I don't want to be anywhere now than here. Wonderful. Well, I've been working with ayahuasca for nearly 30 years. My interest was first philosophical. I had the pleasure to meet Terence McKenna in the Amazon in '71, and we spent 2 months together. He was writing his first book in my home, in country home. So I heard Terence talking a lot about that before I had my first experience. Then I was in Spain studying there, and about 14 years later, I went back to Colombia and had an experience with ayahuasca with the same Indian, and then I thought to make a film, and so I became first like a filmmaker, and then I gathered so much material. Then I thought, well, this could be an anthropology thesis, and then I became involved, and I'm just following the vine, So make the film, and then studying religions, and then got involved with all these friends, scientists, and I'm following, in many ways as possible, from the point of view of the arts, from the point of view of psychology, from the point of view of science, and there's no end. So I'm just following the vine. Yeah.
So our next speaker is going to be Jose Campos, who is a traditional healer, an ayahuasquero from Pucallpa, Peru. And he will talk about his approach, and Eduardo is going to translate for him.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Mi nombre es José Campos.
My name is Jose Campos.
Vengo de tradición de curandero.
I've come from a traditional healer line.
15 años de experiencia.
15 years of experience.
Primero 4 años para poder iniciar.
First 4 years of initiation.
Y convidar esta planta tan sagrada, ¿no?, para nosotros.
And to bring this plant so sacred for us to be able to combine others. Convidar. Yeah.
Me gusta más el término no ayahuasca, me gusta más el término purga.
I like more the term purgative, purge, than ayahuasca.
Porque nos purga desde la cabeza
Because it purge our thoughts.
Todos nuestros pensamientos y todo.
And everything.
El día de mañana hablaré sobre mi experiencia.
Tomorrow I'm going to talk about my own experience.
¿Qué funciones hace un ayahuasquero?
What are the functions of an ayahuasquero?
¿Cómo he aprendido?
How I learned.
Gracias.
Thank you.
And our next speaker will be Kathleen Harrison, an ethnobotanist with extensive field experience in South America, also an artist and co-founder of a nonprofit educational group called Botanical Dimensions.
Thank you, Ralph, and thank you for having me here. I grew up with an intimate relationship to plants and nature, and I became a traveler in the mid-'60s when so many of us did, in my search for experience and the early phases of the search for wisdom. I traveled to many cultures and asked many questions and looked at how people used plants. And I also participated wholeheartedly in the beloved LSD revolution, and I honor that medicine still for opening so many windows of consciousness and for raising so many questions. And I feel that led me farther into the plants in various cultures in the ways that people have used them. And honored them in their search for wisdom. I see ayahuasca, as I do some of the other plants as well, as really from the sort of deep botanical point of view, as an upwelling of the impulse of life to express itself and carrying consciousness with it, carrying power with it. And I see that as an incredible tool and opportunity that we have, but also it's complex, as is all power and knowledge. And I'm sure we'll talk about that more over the weekend. So I've never heard myself simultaneously translated into Spanish. It's distracting me here. It's interesting. It's kind of altered. So I appreciate these plants and the remarkable fact that it's two plants. It's the only really powerful medicine I know that is a synergetic relationship like that, and then the relationship of the people and tradition. And that's really what I look at, both the ethno side and the botanical side. My background and self-training and then also academic training is in anthropology and botany, as well as botanical illustration. And so perception with the eyes and the senses is another aspect of what I feel is the path of learning, and ayahuasca really enhances that. It offers us deeper eyes. Thank you.
And our next speaker is Jeremy Narby, an anthropologist living in Switzerland, who works also in the field of conservation, who's, to my mind, written one of the most interesting and unusual and advanced, really, books on ayahuasca that builds, for the first time, a really credible bridge between hard biological science and traditional knowledge. So, Jeremy Narby. The book is called The Cosmic Serpent, and I highly recommend it.
Good evening. Anthropologists study people, so I'm looking forward to a busy weekend. And I've been working with the indigenous people of the Peruvian Amazon for the last 15 years on questions of land rights and bilingual and intercultural education, so that they can make a space for themselves in the world. And I've seen ayahuasca used by them for knowledge, to gain knowledge about plants and the world that we live in and that we're a part of. And I've also been involved recently with taking molecular biologists to meet with indigenous ayahuasqueros to see if they, the molecular biologists, could gain knowledge from ayahuasca for their own research. And I've also seen ayahuasca being abused in the Peruvian Amazon. So that's what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. All of the above, not just the abuse.
Okay, and our next speaker is Connie Grouds. Connie is a recovering pharmacist, if I can put it that way. She was a traditional pharmacist who has, through her experiences with ayahuasca and other experiences, become an herbalist and an herbal educator for fellow pharmacists, and has done that through engaging in a long-term, multi-year apprenticeship with a South American Amazonian ayahuasquero and curandero.
Thank you, Ralph. That's right. The story starts when I used to be the pharmacist in Novato, just right up the road here, dispensing pills in your prescription bottles. And when hardcore science meets the ultimate spirit of ayahuasca, the answer is, as Ralph mentioned, a shamanic tradition of 6 years apprenticeship here. The story is not only my story, but it's our story. It's what we were like before and what has happened as the transformation of ayahuasca comes into our hearts and minds and our lives. Mine was one of being a corner HMO pharmacist, and upon my first experience with ayahuasca, the plant kingdom opened up, and the plants started to talk to me on the way to work. Every day I would walk the same garden path, and they would tell me all about their medicine and their personalities, and needless to say, I made a quick trip to the psychoanalyst. I thought I was crazy. Give me my life back. I've got to put these pills in this bottle. And the long and the short of it is somehow subconsciously I was drawn to my first trip into the primal Amazon rainforest. And there I met Shaman Don Antonio Montero Pisco, who took one look at me and said, "You have enough energy to be a shaman yourself." And I didn't know what he was talking about. I barely knew how to spell the word. I went down there as an eco-tourist, and I went down there as an ethnopharmacist. I wanted to see where quinine and curare grew. And needless to say, that's what my conscious mind went for. And that's been the what I will be sharing tomorrow will be the story of my apprenticeship and the apprenticeship within the ancient lineage of the Kokama tribe outside of Iquitos, Peru, up the Napo River. The dietas and the disciplinas, what they bring about in the shift in energy and the ability to transfer that to others during healings. The spirit doctors that appear during ayahuasca ceremonies, and we will cover 3 case stories. One, the spirit doctors coming to help somebody with ovarian problems, coming at another time for a polio victim, and another time for a throat cancer victim. So we'll talk about those case studies and what that's all about, and the wisdom that I bring forth for each and every one of us, because that's what it's all about. Thank you.
And our next speaker is Dr. Charles Grobe, who is Director of the Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at UCLA Harbor Medical School. I think I have that right. Charles Grobe has, among other things, been one of the first people to do a government-sponsored and approved research study on MDMA, a drug known to modern young people as ecstasy. And he, together with his colleagues Jace Calloway and Dennis McKenna, was one of the 3 principal investigators of one of the first extensive biomedical research studies on ayahuasca carried out in Brazil. So, Charles Grobe.
Right. Thank you, Ralph. And it's really an honor to be here to take part in this meeting. I've had a long-standing interest in the general field of hallucinogens. When I entered medicine 25 years ago, I had a vision of working in this area, above board as a researcher, as a clinician, and just very systematically attended to all I needed to do to gather my credentials to do that work, and to my chagrin, it was really not possible to engage in active sanctioned research, really not since the 60s has it been permissible to study this class of what are truly fascinating substances which hold so much promise and potential to help us learn about the processes of mind, help us learn about illness, and help us understand how to treat and help those individuals who are suffering, who come to us for help. And it's been a long period of quiet in this area, a long period of really repression of what I consider to be a natural, vital area of interest. Indeed, back in the 50s, even early mid-60s, hallucinogens were one of the most exciting areas in psychiatric research. And yet, with the advent of cultural upheavals of the later 60s, it became prohibitive to engage, for the most part, in this kind of work. I maintained my interest, and fortunately over the last 10 years it has been possible now to open up sanctioned, approved research in particular areas related to hallucinogens. I've done some FDA-approved work with MDMA, and I also had the great good fortune to have been asked to participate in the ayahuasca research project back in the early 90s. At that time, my good friend Dennis McKenna was working with a syncretic church in Brazil to develop a scientific study. A academic psychiatrist was needed, and I, without hesitation, volunteered for that task, and have not regretted it for a second. It proved to be one of the most fascinating and enriching experiences I've had, going down to Manaus in Brazil, working with the people in the União de Vegetal, a syncretic ayahuasca church in Brazil, where, and keep in mind, in Brazil, ayahuasca has been sanctioned since the late 1980s. It is permissible, approved by the government to take ayahuasca within the context of approved religious structures. The particular church we worked with welcomed us into their midst and cooperated to their fullest capacity. In fact, the UDV has a great interest in science, in the science of their vegetal, of their sacred tea, and have been wonderful with us. We've worked closely with physicians in the UDV, developing research protocols, implementing them, writing them up, and publishing our work in high-ranked, peer-reviewed medical and psychiatric and neuroscience professional journals. We have hoped to initiate some new rounds of studies, and in the future, tomorrow, the three of us will share with you some of our findings from our preliminary investigations of ayahuasca with the UDV in Manaus, and also hopefully share with you some of our vision for where this work may lead us in the future. Thank you.
And the next speaker is Dr. Jace Calloway, a neurochemist, a toxicologist, pharmacologist, who lives and does his research now at the University of Kuopio in Finland, and who has made significant and major contributions to this whole field and the neurochemistry and the brain research on neurotransmitters and ayahuasca and other chemicals. So, Dr. Calloway.
Thank you, Ralph. And who would have ever thought that Finland would have become a hotbed of ayahuasca research? But I feel a bit like Lenny Bruce did perhaps 40 or 50 years ago in the U.S., returning here now, that there may be things I just can't talk about. So the things I will talk about come from the hard sciences, chemistry, neurochemistry. And I guess this information is basically for the non-believers, those that really need to know about molecular structures and chemical formulas and how much is in this and how much is in that. I've been reading about ayahuasca since 1984, and in 92, Dennis was at a conference. We were both there, and he asked me if I would like to join them in this expedition. I thought that was a trick question.
It was.
So, yes, we came, we saw, and we measured. We're still measuring. I've put in literally thousands of hours of lab time getting numbers out of this stuff. It is absolutely the most complex thing I've ever been involved with, and the challenge of a lifetime. It still continues. So I'll be talking about that tomorrow.
All right, and last speaker in this first series is Dennis McKenna, an ethnopharmacologist and phytochemist, plant chemist, who together with his brother Terence did most amazing, some early explorations in the 70s of South America, of ayahuasca, that were reported in a book called The Invisible Landscape, Mind, Hallucinogens, and I Ching, probably one of the most remarkable para-scientific tracts that has ever appeared that I know of, the implications of which are still being worked out, both by Terence and Dennis and others. And Dennis has gone on to a significant and important career in pharmacology and chemistry and ethnobotany, and has published extensively on the complex science of ayahuasca. So, Dennis McKenna.
Well, thank you, Ralph. So far, everyone is well under their 5 minutes, and I'm going to be 2 if somebody doesn't pass me a glass of water from down there. It is a pleasure to be here. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces and so many new ones. I want to say, before getting into, before mentioning some of the things, I do want to say that we saw, my family is here with me, and we saw my brother this afternoon. As many of you know, my brother is gravely ill. But he told me to be sure to extend his love and greetings to all of his friends here. And you know who you are. And he wanted to be sure that that message went out. And his strength is weakening, his body is weakening, but his spirit is strong. And so I just wanted to say that, and he wanted to be sure to send his greetings to you. As you know, many of you who know the story of Terry and Denny and the Invisible Landscape, you sort of know how we stumbled into this in the early 70s. And literally, that's kind of how it happened. We didn't have any idea what we were getting into. And I guess that's often the case when you get into something truly significant, something life-changing. You have no idea what you're really letting yourself in for. And we did it, and the rest of my life, and I guess to a certain extent Terence's, has been an effort to sort out what all this has been. One of my approaches to try to redeem myself, I guess, and deal with some of the experiences that we had in the Amazon in the early 70s has been to, in some sense, retreat into the hard sciences. Many of our early experiences are difficult to explain under any paradigm, scientific or otherwise, but certainly pointed out the limitations of the scientific approach to understanding these hallucinogenic and theogenic plants, if you prefer, and the states of mind they make available. But in order to transcend the limits of science, you have to first understand how to do science, and you have to understand how that process works. So there are many questions about ayahuasca that can be approached from a scientific point of view, and that kind of became my focus. After returning from the Amazon in the early 70s, I completed my undergraduate work and returned again to Peru in 1981 as a graduate student with a much more specific program, which was to try to understand more about the botany and chemistry and pharmacology, as well as the ethnomedical uses of ayahuasca and other South American entheogens, particularly those based on tryptamines. One of the things that's got us both quite interested in this whole field early on was the fact that not only did the fact that the tryptamines give you access to these rather interesting states of mind or dimensions, or not quite sure what they are, but the tryptamines seem to be unique in that they are ubiquitously distributed in nature, are all over the place, these tryptamines, and there's a very simple reason for that. They are very closely related to tryptophan, which is an amino acid that is universally distributed in plants, animals, and us included. So 2 trivial steps away from tryptophan, you have the first, most simplest molecule, which is DMT. And that thing is all over the place in plants and animals, including us, including the human brain. This always seemed to me a kind of an interesting commentary on the way that nature is structured, the way that reality is structured, that just beyond the veil, well, the other odd characteristic of DMT is that it's not orally active if you simply eat it. So you can be stuffing yourself with all kinds of things full of DMT, and unless you happen to also take a plant that inhibits monoamine oxidase, the enzyme that breaks it down in the gut, prevents it from getting to the brain in an active form, you may never suspect it. But when the day comes that you do happen to simultaneously ingest a beta-carboline containing plant, you're in for a big surprise. And I kind of think that's probably how it happened, because these beta-carbolines also are fairly common in nature. They're not unusual molecules at all. So it seemed a great mystery in a way, and an obvious thing, and yet in other ways, why should the universe, why should nature structure itself such that there is this hidden molecule in nature which will under only certain circumstances reveal itself? So that seemed worth looking into. And my approach has been, again, because didn't know how else to do it, to adopt the scientific method, the methods of pharmacology, chemistry, botany, to a certain degree ethnography, to try to suss out what is going on and understand it a little better. Tomorrow when I give my talk, I'm probably not going to give much data. I think that between the two of them, Jace and Charlie will give you more data than I could possibly do it, and than you will really want, than you will really need, and they'll do it much better than I can do it. And what I'm more or less going to talk about is kind of my own experiences, how I kind of stumbled into this field and where it's led, and some of the events that led up to our initiating this biomedical study of ayahuasca in Brazil in 1993, which is really not the definitive study. I think Charlie called it the definitive study, but I think he would agree that it's the preliminary study. There's much more to be done. So thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I'll ask the presenters of the first series to return to the seats in the first row, and then the presenters of the second series, namely Sylvia Nakac, Jonathan Ott, Annalisa Schitzinger, Diane Haug, Aparecida Groom, Alex Polari, Lucia Kroll, and Ken Symington, to come up in that order.
Maybe we should scoot down.
Yeah, let's go.
So our first speaker is a musician for whom I have a tremendously high regard, Sylvia Nakac, who is going to perform for us tomorrow evening in a concert of music inspired by ayahuasca and shamanic visions. Sylvia Nakac.
Thank you. Thank you, Ralph. I'm very happy and honored to be here. Finally, my sonic imagination will have an audience that is appropriate. In a long time ago, I think it was 1983, I went to the Amazon, and I went to sleep, and the next morning, a sound woke me up, and it was a very particular sound. It was breath sound, like. And it took absolutely my attention. I woke up, I was not afraid. And I asked what was that sound with the first indigenous person that was there. He told me, when it's quiet in the morning, you can hear the breath of the plants. Whenever I can, I come back to the Amazon just to hear that sound. Sound is my connection with ayahuasca, and I've been researching on the music, specifically the power of the plant spirit to influence and trigger musical energy, and the voice. The voice is my thing. How the voice is free when even reading about ayahuasca, even listening the songs. In 1987, I started researching the music specifically to write an opera that I finished in 1990. The name of the opera finally was Amazonia Insight, because I realized that a space in my consciousness was created, a layer in my consciousness that whenever I go there, I create music. And when I need inspiration or I feel that I'm ready to do something, I start listening again the music of the Amazon. Then for me, the relationship is creative imagination and the plant, Amazon, indigenous spirit, energy. And tomorrow we put together a concert for you of the fantasy songs that have been inspired in the with the spirit of the plant, which I learned when I first heard about the plant. I used to call it the wine of death, and since then I've been also following the vine. And tomorrow we will share the music that was created with this passion that I have for it.
So our next speaker is Jonathan Ott. He's a independent researcher, institutionally not affiliated. He likes it that way. Chemist, pharmacologist, botanist, a man of encyclopedic knowledge. He has in fact written an encyclopedia about psychoactive drugs called Pharmacotheon. Tremendous work, and has lectured, and several other books as well, has spoken and lectured and taught widely all over the world, and I'm very happy to have his presence here and his knowledge here.
Thank you, Ralph. And thank you all for coming, because your presence here makes it possible for all of us to be here, and we like being here. Well, I do, speaking for myself. I'm not an expert or a specialist in anything. I'm a learner, rather, and I'm just a human animal with a particular avidity for information, especially the linguistic kind, and an inveterate pharmacophile, which is to say a dyed-in-the-wool doper or druggie. And I don't want to offend anyone, but I don't see, in that context, I don't see ayahuasca as being anything special or different from any other things that I'm interested in. They're all special, and they're all very different. Yes, I'm a pharmacophile. I like drugs. And it's one of my favorite forms of sustenance. And I'll be talking a little bit about tryptamines. Lately I've been engaged in, I jokingly tell people I'm a professional psychonaut. Or psychonaut is a word that Ernst Jünger created to describe one who travels in the psyche or in the spirit. And I've been interested in tryptamines for about 10 years. Well, actually more like 25 years, but I started out with psilocybin and LSD type tryptamines. But lately ayahuasca type, and I'm going to be talking about some of my psychonautic work on tryptamines, modeling pharmacologically ayahuasca first, or what I call anahuasca or pharmahuasca. And then I'll be talking about modeling some of the psychoactive snuffs, which many of you might not be so familiar with, shamanic snuffs. The substance of a book that I'm just finishing called Shamanic Snuffs or Entheogenic Orines. And I'll be presenting some recent data from this summer on research with what I call pharmaniopo, which is modeling bufotenine-based snuffs. Bufotenine is 5-hydroxy-DMT, and an isomer of psilocin, which is 4-hydroxy-DMT. I'll also be talking about pharmapena, which is based on 5-methoxy-DMT, or O-methylbufotenine. And these are, like ayahuasca, are a number of spokes in the wheel of American shamanic pharmacognosy, of which tobacco is in fact the hub. And I'll talk a little bit about tobacco-based snuffs also, and nicotine. Thank you.
Jonathan mentioning tobacco actually triggered me to point out to you that we have here a plant, two psychoactive plants sitting right here, brought in by Rob Montgomery of Botanical Preservation Corps. The large showy plant with the purple and white flowers is Brunfelsia, a particular species, I don't know which one. Brunfelsia grandiflora, which is an additive. Ayahuasca has these two main things, but in the Amazon it has many different additives depending on so that's Brunfelsia, and there's a tobacco plant. The other sort of scraggly plant down there is tobacco, and tobacco is to most South American curanderos central and essential synergistic with ayahuasca. And our next speaker is Anneliese Schinzinger, who has a long year, 15-year involvement in one of the 18-year involvement in one of the Brazilian Ayahuasca-using churches, and has traveled extensively in Brazil, and and has had some interesting experiences, particularly from the point of view of a contemporary American woman's life and experiences. So.
I want to express my appreciation to the plant kingdom and to ayahuasca, who has been an incredibly important ally in my life. My journey began many years ago. I was bedridden for 8 months with hepatitis B, and I spent the time dreaming. I wanted to go somewhere very different from anywhere I had been up until that point in time. I had traveled extensively with my parents around the world. We'd lived in many countries, and I had lived in other countries on my own. And I wanted to study abroad. I was studying at UC Irvine as a Spanish major, and I chose Brazil to study Portuguese. I was drawn to Brazil like a magnet. Spirit knew I would take important steps on the healing path there. 8 months into my stay in Brazil, I was introduced to ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, as the União de Vegetal calls it, and so initiated an 18-year relationship. I left the União in 1995. I've been working with dreams, and it's appropriate that I serve some water because I have had strong buhaxeiras, the expanded state of consciousness, by drinking water and being tuned in to sessions going on in Brazil. I lived in Brazil for 6 years and have traveled extensively, spent periods of 6 months, 8 months. I worked as an interpreter and translator. And so ayahuasca has been very close to me. She has always been in my heart, and even though I'm not communing with her in liquid form, I feel her presence. She appears in dreams. Sometimes I have the buhaxeira, the expanded state, in dreams. Either I'll be in it or I'll drink the tea and I'll be in it. So she's an ally. She's still an ally, even though physically I'm not drinking her in liquid form. Ayahuasca has accompanied me in my professional life. I was a high fashion model in Brazil. Back in the States, I worked in a free clinic, rose in the ranks of human resources to human resources director of a company. I switched to vocational rehabilitation to work with injured workers. And when my mother was diagnosed with cancer in '91, I began my career as a hospice caregiver. And now I'm studying to practice Tina Tsang, Chinese inner organ massage. I
cards, and my other aunt would heal people with her hands. So that's not very. That's kind of uncommon, but not really in Brazil, because we're very open to all these phenomena, so-called phenomena. So my experience with ayahuasca and what I want to talk tomorrow and expand more is very scientific, because it's a science of the heart. It's through ayahuasca I heard the planet, the goddess Gaia, talking to me about the need for us to change the way we relate to nature, to plants, to animals, rivers, the oceans, and especially our own bodies and our sexuality. And to realize that nature is sacred. Our bodies are sacred. And just the opportunity that we have to be now, here, now, in this body, is the most miraculous thing ever. So I want to expand on that, because that's what I got from this beautiful medicine, and I want to share with you. And that's what I've been doing in my work, the work that I created with dance, movement, and a lot of love. So I'm looking forward to share some more with you tomorrow. Good night.
And our next presenter is Diane Haug, who is a breath worker and a therapist who has had many years of experience, particularly in working with the holotropic breathwork processes that are developed by Stan Groff, which she teaches nationally and internationally, and has also traveled extensively in South America and worked with indigenous curanderos there. So, Diane Haug.
I think he said it all. I do have a background as a mental health professional, a psychotherapist, and a 20-year interest now in healing. I feel that we have a lot more to learn about healing. My long-standing professional association with Stan Groff has been a rich one, and it has provided a lot of opportunity, including in the most recent years extended work in Argentina, Brazil, Chile. And in the context of this work, about 12 years ago, I had the opportunity to visit a community, a UDV community in Brasilia, and have my first experience with the tea. And it was an absolutely compelling experience for me to see a community of several hundred people, children, teenagers, adults, elders, come together to sit in a space and move very deeply into non-ordinary or expanded awareness for a period of time. And at the end of that 4-hour period, disperse into committee meetings. The library committee met, the finance committee, the teenagers were out cutting watermelon and popping popcorn, and it was just a stunning experience of a community using this sacramental plant medicine. I had never seen a group of people that seemed to be so happy, healthy. I saw so much vitality. I talked to mothers who had consumed the tea in labor and delivering their children. I learned of infants that had been exposed to homeopathic doses of the tea since they were born, and it was just an eye-opening experience. I had the opportunity to have more experiences with the UDV in Brazil, and then had a variety of experiences in the Peruvian Amazon. And my particular attraction was to a shamanic form. I appreciated very much the opportunity to work in an intimate connection with the natural world, the presence of darkness, the inclusion of silence in the work, and the icaros that come as a part of that tradition just moved me deeply. So I tomorrow hope to share more about my experience and talk about how I've been able to translate that in some way with my work with others. So I'm delighted to be here. 10 years ago, I would have never imagined in my wildest dreams that there would be 500 people gathered together to explore this work. So I look forward to the weekend. Thank you.
Well, and last but certainly not least, Ken Symington is an independent researcher who grew up in Peru, I believe, right? Lived there for many, many years, and worked with several ayahuasqueros and curanderos, and has written and translated 2 books. He translated an incredible book called The Three Halves of Ino Mosho. I hope I have got that right. Who was a well-known healer who worked with ayahuasca, who has had other books written about him as well, written originally in Spanish. And he's recently translated another book by a Spanish scholar, The Brief History of Drug by Esco Hurtado. And he's going to be moderating tomorrow, both for Connie Grouds and Jose Campos and on their session, and also for the Sunday afternoon panel on the Amazonian cultural context. So, Ken Symington.
Thank you, Ralph. Well, many years ago, when I was still somewhat young or younger and still partially tender, I was invited to attend an ayahuasca session, and that would have been my first experience. And I found when I got there that all of the participants, including the person that had organized the session, didn't know a word of English. And the session was going to be conducted by a Peruvian shaman that they had brought specifically for the session. So when I landed there, I found myself the only one that was able to speak Spanish and English. And when I told the ayahuasquero so, I could see his face light up, because for the first time he was able to speak Spanish. And of course, that was my friend Jose here. And we made a good connection, and we had a wonderful session. And he said, "Why don't you come and work with me in Peru?" So next month I was in Peru, and I spent 6 weeks or something working with him in Peru, and that was my first exposure to ayahuasca. And then it changed my life so much that I decided to keep on going, and I've been going back to Peru every year for a month or sometimes six weeks to work with not only Jose, but then a lot of other people, and see how they worked and how they used the session and how they worked the ayahuasca. So essentially, I'm here as a student, and incidentally, while I was there, as Ralph mentioned, I had the good fortune to come across this incredible, what I thought, wonderful book about ayahuasca. It's not a technical or a descriptive book. It's simply a novel, but based on ayahuasca. And I thought it was some of the best writing that I had ever read on ayahuasca, and then had the good fortune to contact the author and translate it, and it came out in '96, and it's really an incredible book about ayahuasca. So I'm very honored that Ralph invited me. So I'm here really as a student of ayahuasca, and I'll be moderating a couple of panels tomorrow and on Saturday. And again, speaking from both sides of my mouth, the English and the Spanish, translating for Jose when he does his presentation. Oh, thank you very much.
I'd like to express my thanks to all the presenters and also for coming and sharing their experiences, their learnings, which is going to continue over the next 2 days. I'd like to also say just my personal feeling of gratitude and closeness to them. All of them have become really friends of mine, close friends, and we have shared many learnings and explorations together. So it gives me great pleasure, and it makes me again feel grateful for the opportunity to bring together such dedicated, intelligent, sensitive individuals who can share their learnings and explorations and knowledge with you all, who are no doubt also involved in a path of exploration and healing, and as you know, as we all know. There are two additional individuals whom I would like, who are not here, but whom I would like to acknowledge for their contribution. They could be here. They were actually invited to be here, but for a variety of reasons could not be here. One of them is Michael Harner. Michael Harner is an anthropologist, and I believe it's correct to say that he was actually the first North American anthropologist who actually took ayahuasca with the indigenous Shipibo Indians, Canibo or Shipibo Indians in Colombia, Bolivia, Peru. And in the early 60s, he wrote a book about the Jivaro, Ecuador. He worked with several different tribes, and it's important to realize the incredible courage that he had in doing that, because he came from anthropology graduate school, where what was taught was these are neurotoxins, dangerous neurotoxins, and as an anthropologist, you would never ever take these things. I mean, these are primitives that are taking these. I mean, nobody ever thought about the logic of that, but that was the teaching. His informants told him, he's doing the ethnography, said to him, well, if you really want to know what our culture is about and what our worldview is about, you got to take this plant. So he finally did. And I just want to share an experience. He related an experience in his book, The Way of the Shaman. He's later become very active in teaching. He wrote a book also called Hallucinogens and Shamanism. Later became active in teaching, researching, and developing a whole school that teaches shamanic practices not involving psychoactives, but involving rhythmic drumming, which is the two major shamanic traditions worldwide are those involving psychoactive plants and those involving rhythmic drumming. The similarities are in intention and in worldview, purposes of healing and divination. Michael relates this experience, a turning point experience for him, and I think for many who read it, because what happened, he went into this thing, he had powerful, complex visions involving extraterrestrial beings, and the high point of the vision was where he met these gigantic kind of reptilian flying reptiles that basically communicated to him that they were the rulers of the world. Where he went to the old man that had been his informant, his teacher, the old curandero, and he was shattered. His worldview was shattered. He had all his conception of understanding and of reality were turned upside down. And he went to this thing. He didn't know how to expect these flying dinosaurs. So he said, "What were these giant flying bats?" He called it. And they said, that they were the actual rulers of the world. And the old shaman kind of looked at him and said, "Oh yeah, they're always saying that." And the significance of that, when you think about it, was for him, as he pointed out, that it meant the recognition of a larger reality, known and understood by these people. That it was not a toxin-induced brain delirium or hallucination, but it was a reality that was known and understood and explored and shared and could be communicated. And that has become, I think, really the world. That is the traditional worldview we live of shamanic societies. Is a larger worldview than our worldview that we ordinarily have, which is limited to the material level of reality. The shamanic view includes the material level, but includes the non-material level as well, sometimes called non-ordinary level. So I want to honor Michael Horner, who couldn't come as our guest because he recently had a stroke and he is somewhat incapacitated, but for his long-term contribution to the understanding of shamanism and hallucinogens as well. So. And I might just mention also that his books are here. There's also a website. He has a foundation called the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. They have a website, and so he's still very much with us in spirit. The other person I want to honor is Terence McKenna. And Terence McKenna, Dennis's brother, is the person from whom I personally actually learned about ayahuasca. He was the person that initiated me into ayahuasca, and he is a remarkable, one of the most remarkable explorers of consciousness, and I'm proud to have known him, learned from him, and have been his friend. And he reminds me in many ways of my old friend Timothy Leary. He's also an Irishman. He's also an Irishman with an unbelievably zany sense of humor, with an unbelievably sparkling gift for words. And with an incredible sense of the ability to articulate complex internal states. It was from Terence, as well as from people like Michael Harner and Eduardo Luna and others, from whom Kathleen Harrison as well, from whom I came to a much deeper appreciation, because I was coming out of the Western scientific model of drugs that change consciousness, can be used for psychotherapy or enhancement of creativity or spiritual experience, drugs. From them I came to a much deeper understanding and experience of the age-old traditions of shamanic practices of knowledge, seeking, and healing. So I will always be grateful to him for that, and his many books are incredibly well worth reading, provocative. I don't necessarily always agree with him. We have many rollicking arguments, and he is, as you know, extremely gravely ill. I want to give his website address, because this website address will both does contain updates on his condition for those of you that want to stay in touch with that, and it's also possible to make contribution, material or financial contributions for his present condition, for those of you that are so moved. So the website is www.levity, like levity.com/eschaton, ESCHATON /. So, Terence McKenna.